And what's up, everybody? What is up? We are back, and we're actually back. I say that every video. We're back after like a couple days, but we're legit back after like a month off from UFC DFS picks and lineup advice for DraftKings and FanDuel. This time, it's for UFC 294 out in Abu Dhabi. Islam Makhachev, Alexander Volkanovski. We also have Hamzat Chimaev and Kamaru Usman. Welcome. I am Brian Jester, co-founder here at Occupy Fantasy, and since we haven't done a video in over a month, we only do these videos when there are 12 or more fights, or it's a pay-per-view card. The last time we've done this video was close to the start of football season, and we've gotten a lot of new followers and subscribers here, both on the website, occupyfantasy.com, but as well as here on YouTube. So you may be wondering, what are these videos about, and why the hell should I even listen to you guys? Well, you know me for my football accolades, but I've also won the DraftKings MMA GPP solo 4 different times over the past 2 years. So I know a little bit about MMA DFS, as does my co-host here every time we do these videos, Jake the Snake, owner of MMADFS.com. Jake analyzes and writes about every single fight on the card every single week and gives out his best bets and his DFS picks. Jake, it's good to see you, man. What's up?
Yeah, man, been a minute. Yeah, what, like 5 weeks or something? Jesus. All those 11 fight cards. I mean, it was just one after the other. We were just waiting for a 12 fight card. It was the most 11 fight cards we've had since we started doing this a couple of years ago. It was pretty crazy there.
Yeah, that I mean it's super rough. And what we do in these videos, so we're gonna break down the main event here, Makhachev and Volkanovski. We will analyze the two fighters making their UFC debut. They have no fight logs for you to look at, so we'll give you some context to who they are. Then we'll play everyone's favorite game: good fighter, good matchup, bad matchup, because some fighters have only had a handful of fights. Their UFC stats may be skewed or may not give the full picture. So we'll go through every fighter that has 4 fights or less in the UFC, and Jake will explain if they're actually good or bad, and if this is actually a good or bad matchup for DFS. Then we'll give out our stream parlay of the week. We'll give our favorite prize picks play and a fight that you have to target in DFS. And since this is a live Q&A, we'll answer your questions along the way. So as you're watching, if you have questions, you're watching this live, throw them to the right of the YouTube screen in the chat box, and we will answer them as we go. See a lot of people in here already. Patrick, JP, Paper Chaser, what's up? Jake, and just for those, because we got a lot of questions about this, and we have to allocate our time properly with NFL and UFC and everything going on. But why is it that we only do these videos when there are 12 or more fights on the card? Aside from the fact
Man,
that I mandated it and I don't like doing them.
yeah, I mean, let's point number one is, obviously you're in this for the 100K hits, and it's much, much harder to get those when you're potentially splitting with double digit people on these smaller cards. So I mean, we had to set the line somewhere. Uh, you know, if every single card was 11 fights, I'm sure we would compromise. But generally, we're getting larger cards, and when we get these smaller cards, we get much higher splits, much smaller payouts for winning. So I mean, it's really just about making the boss happy here.
That's always the case. So thank you, Jake, for explaining that. Now, let's get into it. Again, if we have questions here, we'll answer them along the way. I do see Paper Chaser's question, and I will get to that after we break down this main event. So Islam Makhachev, Alexander Volkanovski. Islam was slated to fight Charles Oliveira in a rematch. Instead, he gets another rematch after Oliveira drops out, split his eye open in sparring just a couple of weeks before this fight was scheduled. Volk steps in on short notice to rematch him up a weight class. Jake, talk to me about your breakdown. You watched all the tape, you read everything, you listened to everything. How does this fight play out in the rematch? And most importantly, what does it mean for DFS?
Yeah, I mean, we've seen this, we saw this pretty recently. They fought earlier this year, pretty close fight. I mean, I think going in, people were not expecting it to be that close. Everyone's expecting Islam to just be the bigger guy, to dominate Volk on the mat. And while he was able to land some takedowns, Volkanovski was really impressive in that fight. He overexceeded expectations. He was able to stay completely out of danger. I mean, Islam never really had him in any danger. Maybe a little bit in the first round. He took his back, but I was impressed by what Volkanovski was able to do on the mat, just staying safe when he did get taken down. I thought he looked really strong with the hand control, just keeping Islam off of his neck. And on the feet, we all knew Volkanovski could probably outstrike him on the feet, despite the fact that he was going up a weight class. And both guys landed some shots, but I mean, I thought Volkanovski ultimately outlasted him, and we saw that in the fifth round when he really took over. Looked like Islam gassed out at that point. Volk put Islam on his back and was beating him up to close out the fight. I mean, not a great look if you're Islam there. And definitely in terms of momentum going into the next fight, not really what you want going into a rematch when you finish the last round on your back getting ground and pounded. But Makhachev did go on to win the fight. He won 3 of the 5 rounds, largely through control time. But I think it was closer everywhere than people were expecting. The striking was a little bit closer. Islam had some good shots. On the mat, it was closer. Volkanovski had his moments in the 5th round, and earlier in the fight, Islam wasn't as dominant as we were expecting. So obviously it's important that Volkanovski had a full camp going into that one. He had like 7 months to move up a weight class, to bulk up, to prepare. And you could tell he was bigger than he had been at 145. And even when he dropped back down to 145 for his last fight against Yair Rodriguez, he kept some of that size. He still looked bigger in his last 145 fight than he did in his past 145 fight. So he's a bigger guy now. I think that will benefit him coming into this one because he took this fight on 11 days notice. So obviously way less time to move up. His last fight was at 145. His next fight was going to be at 145. This fight is at 155. And he took the fight on 11 days notice. So he didn't have the luxury of putting on the muscle, putting on the weight right. He just had to be like, all right, well, I was kind of on vacation. I just had elbow surgery. But yeah, I'll take the fight because I really want it. And I don't know if that opportunity will come around again. So I get it. He's one of the greatest fighters in the world, making a case for one of the greatest fighters ever, just based on what he's doing. So, you take these opportunities and you can really elevate yourself into that conversation with potentially the greatest fighter of all time if you beat Makhachev up a weight class on 11 days notice. Obviously, the money's nice, but I think he's taking it to win, man. I don't think he's taking it for a paycheck. And I think the first fight was competitive enough that he already has the game plan. A lot of these times on short notice fights, it means you don't have any time to game plan. Well, he's already game planned for Makhachev. They've already fought each other. He knows how he wants to attack him. He knows where he's strong, where he's weak. They've both felt each other in the octagon. It was just about getting your body right. I don't think they really had to do much different in preparation, tweak a few things. He talked about being more aggressive here, about pushing for a knockout harder because he knows he can stay safe on the mat. Whereas in the first fight, he's coming in, he's like, all right, I can't get taken down by this guy because they'll probably sub me. Now he's like, all right, well, I got taken down 4 times in the first fight. I stayed safe the entire time. Like it wasn't even close. We saw Brian Ortega come really close to subbing Volkanovski. Islam Makhachev never came close. So that has to give him a lot of confidence. And there's a lot of different factors here. The first fight was in Australia. It was in Volkanovski's backyard. It had a shorter rehydration window, a smaller time period between the weight cut and weigh-ins and the actual fight, which Islam complained about. There was the whole IV gate thing where, I guess his weight cut was bad enough that, he thought he needed an IV, whatever it was. I think you can just call it a bad weight cut last time. Whereas this time, he looked like he had a better weight cut. He didn't have to go to the shame box this time where he did last time just to make weight. So I would say overall, it's a better weight cut. Islam's going to have the crowd behind him in Abu Dhabi. Obviously, he had a full camp to prepare. Volk did not. So all the things that maybe were going in Volk's favor for the last fight are now in Islam's favor. So I think logically, the people that say, well, he won last time and now everything is going in his favor, so he should win again. But I don't know, man. It's not always that simple, in fighting, you can have all the logical arguments, but then the other guy lands the clean punch, and that's the whole fight. So I think the Volkanovski has shown he can hang in this fight. I think he can hurt Islam on the feet. I think he can stay safe on the mat. We don't know what his cardio is going to look like. He took the fight on a week and a half notice, and he was on vacation practically. He'd sort of been training. He just had a kid 6 weeks ago too, and he just got done with elbow surgery. A lot of variables, a lot of unknowns, a lot of stuff working more in Makhachev's favor. But I think from a confidence perspective, I think that's where Volkanovski has an advantage going into this fight compared to the first one. And maybe that'll be enough to get him over the hump. It's hard to doubt this guy. So I think at the very least, he has a puncher's chance. I think it's going to be harder for him to win a decision. He couldn't win a decision in Australia with the crowd behind him. It's going to be hard to win a decision in Abu Dhabi. He's going to have to decisively win 3 rounds to get his hand raised. So he's probably a knockout or bust here. He did end up in the DraftKings winning lineup in a loss last time where he scored 62 DraftKings points. But that was largely because we had a slate where it was only a few dogs won, and I think like one or two of them scored less than 62 points. So for that to happen again, you would need him to, score 60 or whatever again in a decision, and again only have a couple of dogs winning on the slate or outscoring him. I mean, sometimes we'll get a dog that scores 50 points, and that's basically a loss at that point. So
Right.
it just comes down to him not getting outscored by more than one other underdog for him to potentially do that again. That seems a little too obvious for him to once again end up in the winning lineup as a loser. So I don't really think it happens. There's probably even some other losers that could potentially even outscore him on this card. I think we were talking about that some, but so yeah, I think he needs to win. I think he needs a knockout to win. And it could happen. I mean, it's definitely possible. And from Islam's perspective, he only scored 94 DraftKings points in the decision win last time, only 78 points on FanDuel. He didn't make it in the winning lineup on either site. So yeah, he has more going for him this time. He could score better, but that shows how in a win Islam could get left out of winning lineups on both sides. And on FanDuel, he really needs to finish here. I mean, he wasn't even close to getting in the FanDuel winning lineup last time. So he's a finish-dependent fighter on FanDuel. Maybe needs to finish on DraftKings. It could be closer. I mean, his prices come down. It was like 9,500 last time. He's 8,700 now. It's a little bit different pricing dynamic, but definitely ways that this fight gets left out of winning tournament lineups. In terms of low-risk lineups, I think you probably still stack it on DraftKings just because there's a good chance it goes the distance again. Last time we got like 150-something combined points out of it. I think that's good enough to stack it. Like worst case scenario would probably be one of them gets an early finish, scores 100 points, and the loser scores like single digits, and it's not necessarily going to kill you. So I think the range is good enough that we're still stacking this low risk.
Excellent breakdown there, Jake. I agree with everything you said. And I think there are a couple of things here that we have to think about for DFS. I've already seen analysis out there, whether it's on Twitter or other industry sites, that mention that phenomena with Volk losing and ending up in the optimal lineup. And I think a lot of people looking at this fight are going to assume that the scoring ranges for both these guys are much tighter than what they actually are in reality, right? Between the short notice nature of the fight, between Volk's elbow surgery, between Volk's comments about being more aggressive, between Islam saying he needs to finish this guy, there's a lot of high variance action here that would not surprise me to see an early round finish. I know the odds are favoring it to go the distance, but just based on the subjective factors here, it feels like we could see either one of these guys score 100 plus points when I don't think the field is really expecting that. They're still going to play them heavily, but when thinking about myself and playing 20 lineups, 150 lineups, initial thought was I think I can fade Islam here because of a lower scoring ceiling, but I don't ultimately think that is the case despite his high ownership, just because of all the variables around this fight. If you had to fade one completely and play the other in 100% of your lineups, this is just a far-fetched scenario, Jake. What would you pick? Which side would you go with?
I think it would still be fading Islam just based on the other fighters we have on this card. I think there's more outs, in a win. Like, I think Islam can win and get outscored by so many of these guys. I know he's a little bit cheaper. That makes it a little bit, if he was like 500 more, it would be a lot easier to say that. He's kind of in that middle range.
Yep.
So, I mean, it's definitely like, I'm not going to fully fade him, but if I had to pick one, I don't know. I can see an argument for either one, but I think it would just be Islam based on price. And I just have a lot of confidence in Volk's defensive submission abilities, I guess. Maybe too much confidence.
Fair enough. All right, let's move on here to the co-main. Let's see here. These are quick questions. We'll go in depth answers and segments later. Paper Chaser wants to know favorite GPP stud and dog on DraftKings. So of the 9K or higher options, Jake, quickly, who's your favorite of the group? We have Wood, Ankalaev, Dudakova, Jubli, Basharat, Alaskarov, and Makhachev.
Yeah, for tournaments, it's going to be Wood.
Nathaniel Wood, the cover boy of the Daily Plug today. And of the dogs, we'll get to dogs here later. We're not going to give away everything. Junior says, who is getting knocked out that people think is good? Do you have anybody that fits that criteria, Jake?
Islam?
Volkanovski. Oh, okay. Yeah, maybe someone in the main event. All right, let's talk about this co-main. Everyone's been waiting for the return of Hamzat Chimaev, slated to take on Paulo Costa. He drops out with an elbow infection. In steps Kamaru Usman in typical UFC fashion, makes the fights even better somehow. More marketing, more buzz around the fights. These guys were potentially slated to meet at 170, now meeting at 185. We're not going to go in depth, Jake, as the main event, but just quickly, like very briefly, how do you see this matchup playing out?
Yeah, I think it's probably going to be a worse fight than people are expecting. Um, if you're looking at building the perfect fighter to fight against Chimaev, you would want someone with really good takedown defense, good striking, and durable. So Usman has the best strike or the best takedown defense of all time in the UFC. I know he's getting older, but still, he's got a really good jab. He's only been knocked out once in his career. I just feel like stylistically he's a tough match for Hamzat here. And maybe Usman is, completely done. I don't know. He's moving up a weight class. It's short notice. You've got these rumors of him potentially hurting his knee this week, which I don't know. But at least theoretically, he has what it takes to defend what Hamzat wants to do, which is take people down and finish them on the mat. The only person he's finished on the feet is Gerald Mearstart. All of his other finishes have come on the mat. So if he can't take Usman down, which, we're saying if Usman's legendary takedown defense holds up, 97% takedown defense, if that holds up, then it's going to be a tough fight for Hamzat. We saw against Gilbert Burns, he's really hittable. He's got a 41% striking defense. That was a really close fight, and Gilbert Burns used to fight at 155. So if we're talking about size advantages of Usman moving up, well, Hamzat's moving up too. Like Hamzat's last fight wasn't at 185. I mean, I know he's fought at 185 in the past, but he's still moving up. So I don't think it's going to be that massive of a size advantage for Hamzat. So it's just like, is he really going to dominate Usman on the feet? Basically, he needs to knock him out. So he needs to either take him out or knock him out clean on the feet, which either one are possible, but I think they're probably lower. There's a lower potential of either of those happening than people are accounting for it. So I wouldn't be surprised if this goes the distance. I could see Hamzat winning a close decision here. I could see him absorbing a bunch of big shots. I mean, I don't think Usman's going to knock Hamzat out, even though we talked about the striking defense not being great. I don't know if at this point in Usman's career he's really going to do it. It's not impossible, but I don't see it happening. I think that there's a decent chance he goes the distance, maybe similar to the Burns fight, maybe a little bit not quite as crazy as the Burns fight, though. Lower pace than the Burns fight, and the winner, winner scores like 80 points or something in decision. I don't think that that's crazy. And if you look at the projected ownership of over 70%, I mean, that would be amazing for tournaments.
Absolutely. I mean, is this crazy to say? Like and he really can't because of the pace he tries to put on immediately, and he's probably one of the biggest outside of like McKinney and some of these other guys, like the biggest favorite for the quick win bonus. But like, is it crazy to fade Chimaev at 40% plus ownership in the toughest matchup of his career?
So I thought you were going to say, is it crazy to fade the whole fight? And I was going to say no.
Okay, well, even better then. Okay, so we're getting super crazy here. It's UFC After Dark here on Friday night. So Jake says he gives you permission to fade the entire fight. So I do see it, Jake. I definitely see past to where that fails and the leverage you get over the field. I'm not sure we necessarily need it on a 13 fight card, but if you are looking for leverage, you can't figure out who else to exclude from your player pool. It's certainly a great argument to be made there. All right, let's talk about these UFC fighters making their debut. We have two on the card. Let's clear out the lineup card here. And let's sort by the first fight of the night until the last fight of the night. And actually, in the first fight of the night against Bruno Silva, we have a fighter making their debut, Shara Magomedov, who, if you wanted to watch his tape, you could not Google search Shara Magomedov. You couldn't even search his nickname, Shara Bullet. You had to search Shara Bullet in Russian, and maybe you could find some fights. But we did find some fights on him, Jake. Talk to me about Magomedov, undefeated guy. What's his fighting style like, strength of schedule, and how's he match up with Bruno Silva here?
Yeah, I just want to say Google Translate is super helpful when you're trying to find this Russian tape, because you're just like, I don't know what any of this says, but once you find out what his name is in Russian, that's when you can find all the tape.
Yep.
So Shara Magomedov from Dagestan, but not your typical Dagestani, because he doesn't wrestle. This guy's a pure striker, loves to throw a bunch of kicks, 29 years old, 11-0 with 10 knockouts, which will lead most people to believe that he's this crazy knockout threat, but he's kind of this like hybrid karate style kicker who does a really good job of kind of dancing around the octagon, kicking people, almost with like a Umar Nurmagomedov type style of just with that lead leg, just attacking people. He's got like some Muay Thai and Thai boxing experience, so I don't want to call it a complete karate stance. He's got like a hybrid of a bunch of different things, but either way, very light on the feet, very good at kicking people from the outside, not getting hit a ton himself. And while he has been finishing people on the regional scene, you have to kind of question a lot of the competition he's been facing and whether or not that finishing ability is going to translate to the UFC level. It may. He's powerful. It seems like the type of style that is more conducive to winning decisions at the UFC level than landing a ton of finishes. But I mean, I could be wrong. It's just that, if you're going to be kicking people from the outside, trying not to get hit, you really have to be landing some clean knockouts or like leg kicks or liver shots to get these finishes. But I mean, he'll occasionally throw hands, but he's not looking to wrestle. He's not really looking to grapple at all. And that's going to make it tougher for him to score well in DFS because he's so reliant on just putting up huge volume numbers. And, even with crazy volume, he's probably going to need a finish. Like he could land 100 strikes here and still get left out at 8,600 on DraftKings. And thankfully, FanDuel originally priced him at $12 and then voided that slate and fixed it and priced him at $18, which I was like in the middle of writing him up about how FanDuel messed up the whole thing and figuring out like the strategy with $12, negative 300 favorite. And then I reloaded the slate and they completely changed it, which I'm actually happy they did. But first time they've ever done that. Unprecedented move on FanDuel's part to release the slate twice. But anyways, I'm getting out of here. Oh yeah, I didn't mention he only has one eye.
Yeah, the most important part, only has one eye as a fighter. I got to say, Jake, as I was charting them myself for the model, my initial thought was, wow, this guy doesn't throw a lot of volume, has a style that you're talking about that typically is not conducive to DFS scoring. But then as the more I'm charting, I was like, wow, these strikes are adding up. And then he gets the late round finishes. And it's like, wow, he actually put up more volume and more DFS ability than I expected at the onset of pretty much every single fight he had. Maybe some accumulative damage, later round finishes. But either way, I'll just say that, do you agree that maybe upon initial inspection, he actually has a little bit more upside than maybe his style would suggest?
Yeah, I don't mean to say he doesn't have upside. I just mean to say he needs finishes. Like, I think he's going to land a ton of volume. And when he can combine those with finishes, he's the type of guy that can score like 1 million points on FanDuel. Yeah, I have him as like the second highest volume striker on the slate. So yeah, he lands a ton of volume. Like most kickers don't land that much volume. This guy's constantly kicking the shit out of people. He lands a ton of volume. He just needs to get finishes with that volume because he doesn't add any grappling.
Exactly.
So it's like he's not going to score 120 points in a decision, but he can get like a third round knockout and still score a ton of points because he's gonna land like 100 strikes with it.
I would think Silva's a pretty good opponent for that to happen. I would think, just as far as pushing the pace, and should be an up tempo fight. So.
Silva's never been knocked out. It's the one thing, but he has been rocked by some grapplers recently, and he's getting old. So yeah, I think it's tricky. It's like Silva will be pushing the pace. He's never been knocked out, but if he gets knocked out, then you're going to score a bunch of points against him.
Fair enough. The other fighter making their debut, the first fighter out of the UAE in the UFC, which was kind of surprising to me. I didn't realize that had been the case. We have Muhammad Yahya. He's fighting Trevor Peek. Talking about Yahya, his style, his background, his level of competition.
Yeah, so 29-year-old guy, 12-3 with 9 finishes. Like you mentioned, hometown Abu Dhabi guy. I didn't realize he was the first one either until media day. They were asking how it felt to be the first guy from the UAE. And I was like, oh, wow, that's crazy because they've had multiple cards there and they normally, bring in some local talent, but somehow they hadn't. But his last 2 fights were actually at the Etihad Arena where his debut will also be. So he should be familiar with the arena, the venue, everything that goes into being in a fight there, which you figure that has to help some. I mean, it's kind of like when guys have fought at the Apex going into their debuts and you say like, oh, okay, you're comfortable with it, but it doesn't always work
you
out.
Compare it to Trevor Peek coming from bumfuck Tennessee or wherever he's from all the way to UAE. A little bit different in just fight preparation and comfortability.
Right. Yeah. I mean, this is the first time Trevor Peek's ever fought outside the country. So a little bit different when one guy's already there and another guy's leaving the country for the first time. Yeah, Yaya's last 3 fights were all scheduled to go 5 rounds in UAE Warriors lightweight championship matches. Last two made it to the 5th round. Last one went to a decision. It was really close. Honestly, I thought he could have lost. But you would think by looking at his record, like, oh, he's been in a bunch of 5 round fights. He must have great cardio. But he's like gassing after the second round in these 5 round fights. He's
Yeah,
getting rocked a bunch too. We've seen him get dropped like multiple times by some questionable talent. We're like, all right, what's going on with his striking defense? Not what you want going into a Trevor Peak fight.
nope.
He's sort of well rounded in terms of he'll grapple, like decent grappler, decent striking, but striking defense is going to be his biggest issue, and it's probably the worst matchup to have a bad striking defense. So I don't know, man. It's looking a little bit rough for the hometown guy, but if it does go the distance, you figure the judges will probably be on his side, and he does have the grappling advantage. So there's some upside for him. But yeah, I'm definitely pretty concerned about his chin after seeing how often he was getting dropped by guys on the regional scene.
I think that's fair. And as we've seen through 2 Trevor Peak fights so far, 3 if you include his Contender Series fight, we want to target basically every fight he's in until he's out of the UFC or changes his style. We don't see him changing his style anytime soon. Does Yaya present any hurdle to that strategy that we look to employ in peak fights?
So Yaya was pretty low volume recently, but I think Peak's going to force him into a higher volume fight. And if you go back earlier in Yaya's career, like when he's comfortable, he'll let his hands go. But for some reason, these last couple, I don't know if it was just because they were 5 round fights, he was trying to preserve his 10-minute gas tank or what, but he definitely wasn't throwing a ton of volume, which was kind of concerning when because I listened to some interviews of him before watching his tape, and he was talking about, oh yeah, I'm an exciting fighter, the perfect matchup, like we're both gonna bring it. And I'm watching his tape, and the guy's like super low volume.
Yeah.
What is he talking about? But I think Peak's gonna force the action, so
Yeah.
I don't really think it matters. I think for Yaya to win, he's gonna have to match Peak's intensity, or else take him down and dominate him on the ground. So yeah, either way, whoever wins should score well.
Totally agree. Totally agree there. I just noticed his nickname is the UAE Warrior, and he was fighting in the organization UAE Warrior. So incredibly creative there on Yaya's part. All right, let's play good fighter, bad fighter, good matchup, bad matchup. Fighters with less than 4 fights under their belt in the UFC. Give some context to their stats. Maybe for the books who just look at inside the distance lines and analysts that look at Vegas numbers and maybe some fight logs. Let's give some context, see if we can uncover any hidden gems, storylines, some positive or negative variants coming a fighter's way. And again, we will start with the first fight of the night to the last fight of the night. Jake, not much we can do with game logs, fight logs, when we look at Victoria Dudakova, who won her UFC debut when Estela Nunez broke her elbow or arm, whatever it was, in just a handful of seconds. So Dudakova, and again, we're going to try to keep this brief because we are at the 28-minute mark already. Is she good or bad as a fighter? And is this a good or bad matchup against Jin Yu Fry?
Yeah, I think she's a bad fighter, and I think it's a bad matchup because, Dudakova is a one-dimensional wrestler. Fry has an 89% takedown defense. It's going to make it hard to execute that game plan. I haven't been impressed by anything I've seen out of Dudakova. Obviously, she had that freak injury win in her recent debut, completely meaningless, other than it'll prop up her scoring and averaging on DraftKings and FanDuel. But yeah, I think she's bad, man. I think it's a bad matchup.
Bad enough for you to consider playing Fry a decent amount in your lineups, or is it just a washout? Because I mean, this is going to be one of the lowest owned fights on the card. So
Yeah, I mean that's the only reason I think to consider playing Fry, because it's not like Dudakova has just been getting like knocked out or anything. I mean she's winning fights and she's going to be forcing wrestling exchanges. So I think that if Fry wins, she's going to score like 50 or 60 points in a decision win. So it would be kind of a similar situation to needing like all the other dogs on the slate to lose for a Volk loss to end up in the winner is equivalent of a Fry win, I think.
fair enough. Fair enough. All right, moving on. We have Muhammad Naimov, who pulled off an incredible upset up at weight class on short notice debut against your boy Jamie Malarkey back in June. Naimov, is he good or bad? And is this a good or bad matchup against Nathaniel Wood, who I can predict you will say it is a bad matchup based on Wood's cover boy status in the plug?
For the record, I've disowned Malarkey. Maybe it was after that fight, maybe a couple fights ago. The guy's, I don't know what he's doing, man. He like lunged forward head first,
Could not believe it.
hands down, and he kind of slipped on the mat as he was doing it, just chin up, just like
So bad.
do it. and gets knocked out by Muhammad Naimov. Yeah, I'm not putting much stock into that win right there. He was losing that fight badly, and then Larky just made one of the stupidest mistakes you've ever seen. And Naimov, he's a professional fighter. He's got a Taekwondo background. He can capitalize if someone's going to literally present their chin on a silver platter. But Wood's a good fighter, man. I know Wood used to fight at 135. People want to say he's a little bit small for 145, but he's solid. He's really good, and I think the move up is actually it should help with his durability. I know he got dropped and hurt by Andre Fili in his last fight, but he's still won all of his fights since moving up to 145. He's on a solid win streak. He's been to a bunch of decisions lately, but he's been fighting a ton of really durable guys. Naimov comes in, has never been finished, but he's never fought anyone good. And I think that he's ripe to be finished. He lost the decision to Colin Anglin on Contender Series. Colin Anglin is absolutely terrible. And Naimov gassed out in that fight. He got taken down a bunch. So, long way of saying Naimov is a bad fighter, and this is a bad matchup for him.
Other than that, outlook is bright for Naimov. So, Jeff in the chat says, winner of the fights. They're actually at 10 a.m. Eastern on Saturday, tomorrow morning. There's a reason we're doing this video at a weird time. Normally, we either do a pre-recorded video on Saturday evenings. Sometimes on pay-per-view slates, we'll wait till Saturday afternoon before the fights and do a live stream. But because it starts so early, we figured we'd do a live stream tonight, get all the questions in, and then still give those who don't watch it live, 12 hours overnight, 14 hours overnight to watch the video. Make sure you are subscribed to the channel here on YouTube. It is free to do so. That'll get you notified whenever we go live, upload any videos. Fingers crossed whenever we get 12 fights or more on a UFC card. All right, Jake, moving on up, we have Mike Breeden versus Anshul Jubli. Are these guys good or bad? Is this a good or bad matchup for either?
Yeah, I think both guys are bad, which in theory presents a good matchup for each of them. But I think it's a better matchup for Jubilee, just because he's shown more grappling and wrestling. I would say. I mean, it's limited. Like obviously, like both guys are bad. Both guys have limited experience against limited competition. I know Breeden's faced tougher guys. He's been knocked out by Terrence McKinney and Hernandez, which are obviously both good. Both guys knocked him out in under 90 seconds. And then he got taken down like 9 times, and his decision loss to Natan Levy. Not a good look. I know Levy's a decent grappler. All three of those guys are going to beat Jubilee, but Jubilee's the bigger guy. Breeden's coming in 0-3, training at Marathon MMA with like Trey Ogden and Miles Johns after Glory shut down. I don't know, man. Like Mike Breeden has heart, but I feel like his body is just not necessarily holding up. He's getting older. He's 34 years old. You see him take damage in some of these fights. He starts shelling up. Natan Levy couldn't finish him. Natan Levy can't finish a sandwich. Like, he's not finishing anybody. So I think Jubilee showed some finishing upside in his last fight. I know it was against a smaller, one-dimensional striker, and that Breeden is at least theoretically a BJJ brown belt and will occasionally shoot for takedowns. And when he did get taken down by Levy, he was getting back up. But if you can get a guy that gets taken down and gets back up, that just creates a scenario where you can land a bunch of takedowns. And then you add on the fact that Breeden has lacked durability recently. He's been knocked out 3 times in his career. Jubilee's more of an unknown. He's the first UFC fighter from India. So, like, he could still be a complete fraud. I don't think he's great or anything, but I think Breeden's a guy we're looking to target every time he's in there. So I think this is more about Mike Breeden being bad and Jubilee being a big guy that has a willingness to wrestle and grapple and has shown scoring upside. He's coming off a big win in his debut. And, at least he's got more upside. He's a younger guy. He's 28 years old. Breeden's 34. Like, he should be getting better, even if he doesn't have great training partners right now in India. I don't know, man. I think it's a little bit volatile, but I think that a lot of people are on Breeden this week. And I think it's really hard to get excited about an 0-3 fighter who's on the brink of getting cut, who has been violently finished like in 2 of his 3 fights and dominated in the other. I mean, I just don't get it, man. But
and miss weight.
And missed weight by 3.5 pounds. I didn't even get to that. Yeah, Andy missed weight by 3.5 pounds, which is just like everything going wrong for Mike Breeden. Thank you for pointing that out. I couldn't even think of all the like red flags with Mike Breeden. There's so many.
Yet the money line is moving in his favor, and I have a feeling, Jake, that you are not a big believer in that money line move. So,
yeah.
All right, let's move on. Let's talk about fight number 9 on the night. Another fight with 2 fighters that fit this criteria. Abu Azaitar, who has not fought since 2021, And we have Cedric Dumas, who last fought on that Jacksonville card, the MMA Live final card. Dumas, 2 fights under his belt. Talk to me about these guys. Either one good or bad? Is it a good or bad matchup for either?
Yeah, they're both terrible, but a Zaitar is a gasser, so that creates a good matchup for Dumas. Again, similar to the last one, they're both bad, so it adds some volatility. Like if you have two bad fighters, then like it's more upside for each of them because you're going against a bad fighter. But I see more upside on the Dumas side just because Zaitar death gassed in the second round of his last fight, and he's fought once in the last 5 years, and he gassed out in his first fight too. So Zaitar's 37 years old, gasses out in every fight, has one fight in 5 years. I mean, that's what we're looking to target normally.
Sounds unlikely to fix that gassing issue after some time off at his age. So, all right, next fight. We have another fight with 2 fighters that meet the criteria. Victor Henry, Javid Basharat. Basharat, we're still waiting, and we will be skeletons by the time he finishes someone. Is this a good or bad matchup for either? Is either one good or bad?
Man, they're both good fighters, which makes it a bad matchup for both of them.
Do you think Basharat can outscore all these other guys at the top? Because he's going to have some of the lowest ownership in that 9K plus range.
No, but he could.
That's all we need.
So the thing is, like, Victor Henry pushes a crazy pace and has struggled with getting taken down, but I don't know, man. I think Victor Henry is a significant step up in competition for Basharat, after facing like a guy making his UFC debut, and Basharat scored 99 points in that fight. So I don't necessarily know if he's going to score more, but I get it. Victor Henry pushes a really high pace, averages almost 6 significant strikes absorbed per minute, which is crazy high, second highest on the slate. So, theoretically, it's a high-paced fight, but it's going to be hard, man. It's going to be hard in a decision for Basharat to probably needs to score like 110 points or something to make the winning lineup. It's definitely going to be tough. I could see him scoring like 95, maybe 100, but I don't know if he quite gets there.
All right. Next, we have Trevor Peek. You already talked about this matchup. I will summarize. Tell me if I'm wrong. Bad fighter, good matchup.
Yeah. Trevor Peek is a bad fighter, but great for DFS just because he's going out there to brawl and kill people every time he steps inside the octagon. And Yaya has been prone to getting dropped. So yeah.
All right, Islam Makhachev, most expensive fighter on the card. He is $9,600. He's 4-0. We said under 4 fights, but I want to count him in here because there's conflicting opinions and maybe even more so on he's overrated. More and more people are starting to believe that. Either way, is he good or bad? He's so super young. Put up some big DFS scores in 3 of his 4 fights. And is this a good or bad matchup against Tim Elliott?
Man, he's good, man. The only reason people think he's bad is because he came into his last fight with a shoulder. They don't even think he's bad. They think he's overrated. He came into his last fight with a shoulder injury, almost got knee barred, left with a torn MCL. He still got a sub in that fight, man. Like yeah. The guy's good. He's just 23 years old, and people need to learn how to manage expectations on a guy that turned pro 3 years ago. They want him to, to act like he has 10 years of experience. Like he's gonna make mistakes. But if you look at his skill set and his potential and his just physical abilities, he's good, man. He's gonna be even better. He's really good, and he's gonna be even better. And this is a good matchup, man. Tim Elliott gets subbed a lot. Tim Elliott is a good hammer when it comes to wrestling. He's good in top position. He's good grinding people out. He's good at cheating and doing a bunch of dirty moves and illegal knees and grabbing gloves and poking eyes and kicking in the nuts and just doing crazy crackhead Tim Elliott stuff. He's not that good a fighter, and he's really submittable, and he only has a 60% takedown defense, and he gasses out. This is a really good matchup, man. I think Makhachev subs him in the later rounds and scores a bunch of points.
All right, love to hear that. 2 more guys, tons of guys on this card that have just a couple fights in the UFC. Muin Gafurov, who lost his debut to John Castaneda. Is he good or bad? Is this a good or bad matchup against Said Nurmagomedov?
He's like a meh fighter, but he has a lot of holes, man. He leaves his neck exposed, charging him for takedowns. He's overly aggressive. So I think I'm going to call him kind of bad from that sense. But he's got the tools to score well in DFS. But this is a really bad matchup for him. I think he's probably going to get submitted in within the first 2 minutes.
Which is great to hear when Nurmagomedov has some of the lowest ownership as a favorite on the card. And we're looking for differentiation always. So finally, we have Islam Makhachev, who is slated to take on Imavov here, right? Was initially scheduled to take on Paulo Costa. Finally gets Warlley Alves short notice. Uh, Alex Scaroff, I'm just going to add a little context here, Jake. Let me do some analysis. I know you've been carrying the load so far, but I think everyone looks at Alex Scaroff's debut, knocking out Halls in round 1, and just, if you haven't done any research, just assuming that's the fighter he is, this knockout guy. His inside the distance odds are crazy here, but it's really not the type of fighter he is, right? If you look at his career, he's taking people down. He's racking up a lot of points on the ground, finishing people on the ground that way. Not this one punch knockout artist like we saw him against Phil Hawes. Now, granted, he's a great fighter. Only loss in his career is to Khamzat Chimaev. But I just want to say that I think the way he finishes this fight and the way people are looking at him could impact his scoring ability, especially at his price, $9,500. I think we both agree that he's a good fighter. We probably both agree that this is a good matchup against Rolly Alves. I'm just curious if you see the same things in Alex Scaroff's game versus how the public is perceiving him, especially just this specific week on this DFS slate.
Yeah, I mean, the guy's a combat sambo world champion. Like, most of his fights are taking people down, dominating them on the mat and looking for Kimuras. Like, it was pretty shocking. Initially shocking that he just did not even shoot for a takedown against Phil Hawes. But if you look at the context, Phil Hawes is a former D1 college wrestler, 100% takedown defense, glass chin. So it totally makes sense that you would go in and be like, oh, he thinks I'm going to wrestle. He's going to be able to defend that. I'm going to knock him out. And it worked out. So I think now is the perfect opportunity to pivot back to your wrestling. I know Worley Alves is like known for his guillotines, but man, the dude's old. I mean, maybe he's not old. He's 32, but he's old in like UFC years. He's been around forever. He's been around in the UFC since like 2014. He's moving up a weight class on short notice. Like, he looks overweight and out of shape. I think Ikram is going to be able to take him down and submit him here. And Worley is really known for gassing out. So it'll just be, like, can Alaskarov, do enough to return value at his high price tag? Like an efficient Kimura submission probably wouldn't, but if he can just dominate him for a round and a half, submit him late in round 2, then he has the potential to break the slate.
For sure. Yeah, I think that's a great way to look at it. All right, let's close out the show here. It is 10:42. We're 42 minutes in, so we will hit these last 3 segments pretty quickly with a fight that you have to target in DFS, favorite prize fix play, and our stream parlay of the week. Let's get the final housekeeping out of the way before we get to those final segments. If you like what you've seen, make sure you are subscribed here on YouTube. Give us a thumbs up. If you have any further questions, join our Discord server, occupyfantasy.com/Discord. The link is in the description below. If you want in-depth analysis for every single fight on the card, check out Jake's site, MMADFS.com. The sheet, which is what it's called on his site, breaks down every fight, betting and DFS. Looks at fighters' backgrounds, how he anticipates fights playing out. He also has some premium content where he gives out bets early in the week, has some additional DFS stuff. Make sure you go check it out. And OccupyFantasy.com is where you can get our heralded Occupy model, ranks every fighter, FanDuel, and DraftKings. We use charted data in there as well. It is proprietary, and it is impressive. And we have the daily plug with our top plays that Jake writes, lineup construction tips, and the remaining best bets that Jake still has late in the week. Everything you need. Again, we say this a lot. I say this a lot. I don't think Jake says it. I say it all the time on these videos. But we know a lot of you just want free content, and we have no problem with that. That's why we do these videos. But for those of you that want the extra edge, make sure you check out MMADFS.com and OccupyFantasy.com for your contest tomorrow. Now, Jake, favorite prize picks play on the slate. You've been doing great on these since you started giving them out. Which one stands out to you the most this week?
No, I've been doing pretty well. We went 5 for 6 last week in the Patreon, and of course, Jonathan Martinez was 16 significant strikes away from having the perfect 6 for 6. So thanks for the leg kick TKO, buddy. This week, like, normally I feel like my top 2 I want to build like around as a core. This week I feel like there's like 6 I really like, but not 1 or 2 that necessarily are ones that I want in every play. But I really like the Trevor Peak over 85.5 points. His money line is now a negative 175. His inside the distance line is negative 120. And, if he's defending takedowns, you're going to get points for that on prize picks. So even if somehow this goes the distance, I think he probably still clears it with the help of takedowns defended in a decision win. But I think he's going to knock him out, and then he would definitely clear it. So I think Trevor Peak over 85.5 is pretty safe. But there's definitely, like 6 that I really like. And I wouldn't necessarily say that, like, that one is significantly more likely to hit than any of the others.
A salesman in the finest sense. So make sure you check out MMADFS.com and OccupyFantasy.com for all 6 or some of those that are equally as good as the Trevor Peak prize picks play. Now, let's talk about fight that you have to target in DFS. Lots of options here, Jake. Which fight do you think outside of the main event is most likely to produce a fighter who wins in the optimal lineup?
I mean, I think the obvious one is just the peak Yaya, and then if you want to look at it like a less obvious, I mean, maybe it's just as obvious. I don't know. The Makhachev Elliott, like I really think Makhachev torches him, but Elliott has shown when he does win, he scores really well. So for sure, as like a hedge, you're going to want some Elliott there, and you can argue that whoever wins both those fights will most likely end up in winning DraftKings lineup.
Fair enough. We have a question here from Mateus. If I mispronounce your name, I'm sorry. Let me know if I how to say it correctly. Mateus, sorry about that. But he says, here in Mexico, we can only send in one lineup. What would you do if you could only play one lineup? It's over 4,300 people in this contest. I'm not sure if it's DraftKings or FanDuel in Mexico, or if it's a different site, or how it works. But I think, and Jake, you can chime in here as well. But when you have one lineup in a contest with 4,300 people, you have to play at least two lower-owned options, right? Obviously, everyone else only has one lineup, but you still have to beat 4,299 entries to win the top prize. So you have to get some differentiation. You can't play all the popular guys. So I would say look at the projected ownership on our site or wherever you decide to look at that. Play at least two that are unpopular. Maybe consider fading the main event. Jake, what is your take for a contest like that?
Yeah, I mean, I think finding some of those guys, like you said, that are lower owned, but not necessarily like crazy long shot low owned plays. Like, don't look at like Warley Alves. Look at like Nathaniel Wood, who
Yeah.
is under 20% owned, but he's a negative 350 favorite.
Exactly, and it's on Bet365, which I didn't know they offered that, so that's super cool. But yeah, Mateus, just look to get in some of the lower owned options. Don't play six, maybe get two, but just look at our model, look at whatever else you look at, find a couple of the stronger plays, because it's still only 4,300 people. It's not 25,000 like the DraftKings contest. So you're looking for the strongest plays that people are overlooking. All right, finally, we'll close out with our stream parlay of the week. And if you listen to me rant or talk about Alex Skarov and his skill set, it shouldn't shock you that my leg of the stream parlay is Alex Skarov by sub in round 2 or round 3. And Jake, that went down a little bit since open, but I still like the odds where it is. What are you going to pair that with?
Yeah, that's at plus 550 now. It was at plus 600 when I gave it out earlier in the week, but not a huge loss. I'm gonna go a little bit safer if you're going riskier. I'm gonna go just pretty chalk here. I'm gonna go Trevor Peak KO plus 100. I don't think we need to get crazy on both legs, and if we combine those together, we can still get 12 to 1. And I feel pretty good about both of those. We just need Warley Alves to at least survive for 5 minutes.
Agree. I think we can do that. Fingers crossed. We'll see if it happens. So that'll do it for the video. We already did all of the housekeeping. Just make sure you're subscribed here. Check out our sites. Follow Jake on Twitter at DFS_MMA. Follow me at BrianJesterFF. Also at Occupy Fantasy. Again, our Discord server is where you can ask questions, talk to other members of the community. I think probably most importantly, you can sweat the fights out with all of us. We're always in there during the fights. Link is in the description below. And we'll be starting there bright and early, 10 a.m. tomorrow. So for Jake, I am Brian. Thank you everyone for listening. And good luck at UFC 294.